Hello, Cleveland, and welcome back to another edition of the Dogland Podcast. I am your host, Jackson McCurry. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Anthony Jokey. What's going on, man?
Not a whole lot, Jack. And you know what? The NFL returns tonight. How exciting is that?
Yes, it does. We are recording this on a Tuesday, but this is Thursday when everybody will be listening to it. So when you're listening to it, whether it's Thursday morning, whether it's Thursday evening, the NFL does return tonight. The Dallas Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will open the season. Tampa Bay obviously will unveil their Super Bowl banner in front of a packed house at Raymond James Stadium, which I think is the best thing because, like Anthony, like we've seen it over the last weekend with college football returning, having fans back in the stands, despite the threat of COVID still lingering across the nation and the world, to see fans in the stands packing a football stadium, it's such a beautiful sight, regardless of what's going on in this crazy world.
Yeah, whether it's at Virginia Tech for Enter Sandman or Jump Around in Wisconsin or the Wave at Iowa. Florida State was a great atmosphere on Sunday night against Notre Dame. The spirit of football is back, and to have these full stadiums, hopefully they're around to stay. Things can continue to get better, and we don't kind of reverse what we've built up to get back to. With COVID and everything. So I just the spirit of football is alive, and I know that that first Browns home game against Houston is going to be absolutely bonkers with a full place. I'm ready for it, and I know all the Browns fans are ready for that, and it's just great to have the spirit of football back.
Yeah, without question. So on today's episode, we are going to preview the AFC. If you missed it, on Wednesday, we dropped our NFC preview. We talked about the contenders, and then we ranked our contenders and essentially who is going to represent the conference in the Super Bowl in February. We are not going to talk about the Browns on this episode because our next episode, which drops on Friday, is our 250th episode. We preview the Browns as a whole, and we talk about them there. We will mention them at the end when we rank the AFC contenders, but we are focusing on the other teams in the AFC on this episode, who we think is the favorite. We talk about the other contenders, the dark horses, etc. So, Anthony, when we talk about the AFC, much like the NFC, when we talked about the kings of that conference, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we would be remiss if we didn't start off this episode talking about the kings of the AFC, the two-time defending AFC champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the Chiefs obviously got throttled in the Super Bowl by Tampa Bay. Their offensive line got exposed heavily. Obviously there was big injuries at that point with Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz both being out of that game, and it got exposed because Tampa's defense ran rampant on Patrick Mahomes, and Mahomes looked so uncomfortable, could not do what he has done since he took over as the starter a few years ago. So what did Kansas City go out and do this offseason? They focused heavily on the offensive line. They traded for Orlando Brown from the Baltimore Ravens. They signed Joe Thuney away from the New England Patriots, and then they spent draft capital to try to rebuild this offensive line. They drafted Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith with two of their first several draft picks, and then they have Lucas Niang, who I think was drafted last year at a TCU, but I don't think he played at all last year. So you essentially had three rookies starting on this offensive line. They start out right the gate against the Cleveland Browns, going up against a Myles Garrett, Jadeveon Clowney, Malik McDowell, Malik Jackson. This offensive line is going to be the question mark of this team going into 2021. If they can put things together, I don't see why the Kansas City Chiefs are not the AFC favorite, or maybe even the favorite to some in the NFL to win the Super Bowl. But I think all eyes are going to be on this offensive line, and will they be able to give Patrick Mahomes time to be Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, and sometimes Patrick Mahomes doesn't need time. He makes time on his own with some of the things that he does. But you're right. They went out, they rebuilt this offensive line after they got thoroughly stopped in the Super Bowl. That front four for Tampa Bay was just incredible with the things that they were able to do against Kansas City. And you could tell that, going into the offseason that Kansas City had a lot of questions at at the offensive line spot, and they did their best to answer them, and we'll see if that's truly the case. Obviously, go in week 1, they have a very tough test right away. When they play the Browns, and I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point too. But they certainly will have a lot to prove, and if they could. Give Pat Mahomes some time to give the likes of Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, time to get free. Travis Kelce, who just terrorizes defenses. Maybe, this team can go back to the Super Bowl for a third straight year. I can't remember the last time that's happened, Jack. It's certainly a lot of talent on Kansas City. But you're right when it's about the offensive line. It's can this come together to give them time to protect Pat Mahomes, to allow them to run the football when they need to? We'll see, and that's the biggest question for them this year.
I assumed you were putting me on the spot when you said who was the last team to make it to 3 straight Super Bowls. It was the Kings of the AFC before them. The Patriots went to Super Bowl 51, 52, 53. So
okay, I figured you'd cover me and be able to answer the question.
I got you, brother. But I mean, the Chiefs, obviously the talent speaks for themselves. Patrick Mahomes, best quarterback in football. Tyreek Hill, and this is another question to me. When he wasn't playing in the preseason, now I know it's preseason, their offense did not look that great. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think it was the Arizona game. Clyde Edwards-Helaire sprains his ankle, and then Tyreek Hill was out, and they just looked so bland, even with Mahomes out there, because Kelce wasn't playing. And you have Mecole Hardman, who there's questions about him. They let Sammy Watkins go, so now he's the number 2 receiver. And you got Demarcus Robinson, Byron Pringle. I mean, there's question marks there on that offense if, say, Tyreek goes down, or even Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They have Darrell Williams, and they signed Jerick McKinnon, who could be a steal later in the season if they need to use him, because he's been a formidable back when he's been healthy. But, if one of these big playmakers goes down, Kelce or Tyreek Hill, the offense – there's going to be, who's going to be the guy that steps up? I don't know, because Mecole Hardman hasn't really had to be that guy yet, but now he's kind of in a situation where he needs to step up and be the guy.
True, but you do have Pat Mahomes. He's one of those talents like Peyton Manning, like a Tom Brady. You can make average receivers look great, and I think that when push comes to shove, I think that system and the talent that Pat Mahomes has, he'll be able to put those receivers in the best spot and deliver the football. They just have to catch it.
Yeah, without question. Mahomes does some incredible things, and if he can make the talent around him better, which, he has shown at times he can. Demarcus Robinson comes to mind because he's made some big plays. That's scary, especially if a Tyreek does go down or if a Kelce does go down. If one of these guys can step up and do what Brady did for so many weapons in New England, and vice versa, what the weapons did for Brady, Kansas City is going to be a scary threat for a long time, as long as number 15 is back there as the quarterback. You go to Buffalo, because I feel like Buffalo and Cleveland are right there, 1A, 1B, as the biggest threats to Kansas City in the AFC. Buffalo is, I think, a year ahead of where Cleveland is in terms of where they were just 4 or 5 years ago, where they were both at the bottom of the AFC. They've obviously had the continuity with the front office and the head coach. And then Josh Allen last year finally emerged as this quarterback that a lot of people were talking about he could be when he came out in 2018. The first couple years were a struggle. The last year, he finally steps up, has an incredible season, and now this offense really started to take off. Obviously, adding Stephon Diggs was a huge get for them. And, they added Emmanuel Sanders this past offseason. They got some talented backs. Their defense is obviously one of the most underrated defenses, I think, in the league. They're right there with Cleveland, Anthony, as I think a team that could definitely knock off the Chiefs. They were obviously in the AFC Championship last year. It will not shock me. And even ESPN ran a season simulator, and it was only one. And that one, Buffalo was hoisting the Lombardi Trophy at the end of the year, and that would not shock me if that were to be the case in 2021.
Yeah, I think Josh Allen is certainly in talks, in a conversation to be an MVP candidate this year.
He got paid like one.
He sure did. I think that he's certainly going to prove that he's worth that money this year in Buffalo. They've done a great job with surrounding him. Sean McDermott, Brian Dable have put him in a very good position in teaching him and having him grow as a quarterback. He's done obviously a whole lot through the first few years of his NFL career. They've invested a lot in their defense over the last couple off seasons, especially on the defensive line. They drafted Gregory Rousseau in the first round this year, Carlos Basham Jr. in the second round. At the edge spot, they drafted AJ Epineza in the second round last year. You know my motto, Jack. You can never have enough pass rushers, and I think that all those guys together are going to push. Mario Addison, Jerry Hughes,
Ed Oliver. This is a big year for Ed Oliver for sure.
You're going to push those guys, and I think that defensive line is going to be very good and can give a lot of teams a lot of trouble. So I think that the Bills are really going to be obviously a candidate to win the Super Bowl. They're right up there, and I think that defensive line might be one of the top 2 or 3 reasons why.
Without question, if they can create enough pressure, it's going to make guys like Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano's job easier on the second level. And then the secondary, which I think is one of the most underrated in the league, with Tre'Davious White, Levi Wallace, Jordan Poyer, and Micah Hyde, it only makes their jobs easier because you create pressure up front. It's going to force bad throws from the opposing quarterbacks, and then the secondary can really take full advantage of it for sure. I think you're going to see that in Cleveland as well with the additions of Jadeveon Clowney, Malik McDowell, Takk McKinley, and Malik Jackson to help Myles Garrett for sure. If they create more pressure, it's only going to benefit the secondary with Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, John Johnson III, Ronnie Harrison, Grant Delpit. I mean, you create pressure up front. It makes things so much easier. And at times, I think in Buffalo and Cleveland and even Kansas City, Kansas City creates pressure. Their secondary doesn't have enough talent, not enough names outside of Tyrann Mathieu, but they are able to make plays because the defensive line creating pressure up front makes everybody's job on the back end of the defense so much easier.
Yeah, and this team certainly has the capability to put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. And on the offensive side, Josh Allen is going to do some incredible things. And I know our buddy Kevin, Jack, is very excited for the season. I'm sure at some point we'll get him on the podcast again this year. And, who knows? We could have a Browns and Bills AFC Championship game, and I think that'd be a lot of fun.
I was hoping for it last year, and his birthday was a couple weeks ago, and I DM'd him. I said, hopefully this is finally the year. And like one of my best friends that I video game with, Matt, he lives in upper New York. We always joke like Browns and Bills is finally going to happen. And like this year it might legitimately happen. And in the ESPN season simulation, it was Browns Bills in the AFC Championship. So like if it finally happens, and we will get Kevin on at some point, maybe during our bye week or something, I know that it's going to be exciting because these are two passionate fan bases, probably the two most passionate fan bases in the NFL. If Browns Bills AFC Championship happens, that would be something incredible for sure.
Yeah, it's certainly a team that we respect quite a bit based on what happened when the Browns were moved. They were one of the two that said no. It was them in Pittsburgh. So I've always had a little soft spot for Buffalo.
With question, and they know our heartache just as bad. I mean, they went through some incredible heartache in the early 90s, pretty much on the level of what the Browns went through in the late 80s, only worse because it was in the Super Bowl. So, yeah, I definitely have a soft spot for the Buffalo Bills as well. And, if they beat us in the AFC Championship game, and I would totally root for them in the Super Bowl. It wouldn't even be a debate because
no, not at all.
They've been through the heartache we've went through, and, they're due for a championship as well. We said we won't mention Cleveland, so we will mention probably the biggest threat to Cleveland in the North and one of the threats in the AFC, and that's the Baltimore Ravens, because they always are and probably always will be just because they're a damn good run organization from top to bottom. This is a big year for Lamar Jackson. Obviously, he hasn't got his contract extension yet, much like Baker Mayfield. Josh Allen's the only one out of the class of 18 to get the big contract extension. Lamar, and this is going to be interesting, Anthony, because the one thing that's been the constant with Baltimore the last couple of years has been the running game. Mark Ingram's gone. He went to Houston in free agency after the Baltimore cut him. Gus Edwards is the lead back now because J.K. Dobbins gets hurt in the final preseason game. Their third running back, Justice Hill, tears his Achilles recently in practice. So now they're going with Tyson Williams, who is a young back that doesn't have a lot of NFL experience. This might be a situation, Anthony, this year where Lamar's going to be forced to throw more. Now, there's the whole narrative Lamar Jackson can't throw. Lamar Jackson can throw. That's not his strongest attribute to his game. His mobility, his running, his speed. That's the biggest ability that he has to his game. He can throw the football. It might always look perfect. There's a suspicious reason why Baltimore is, banning the media from taking video after the wobbly throw to Sammy Watkins earlier this offseason. But this is going to be a big year for Lamar. If he wants to get paid, if he wants to be one of, if not the highest paid quarterbacks in the game, he's really going to have to start utilizing his arm more than his legs, especially now with the situation at running back on offense.
Yeah, they have some guys that are going to have to step up at that running back position. Obviously, Gus Edwards. We'll see who they sign. There's been talks of, them bringing in a couple guys and potentially signing them to help them out in that running back room. But they have still a powerful offense. They brought in Sammy Watkins. They drafted Rashad Bateman. He's on IR right now, but he should be back at some point this season. Marquis Brown has certainly shown flashes. So they're certainly set speed wise. Losing J.K. is really going to hurt them in the running game, but I think this offense, Jack, can still be very high powered. It's just going to fall on Lamar Jackson to be able to make the throws. He's certainly capable of it. There's no doubt about that. He's certainly capable of it. It's just a matter of can he do it consistently enough to propel the Ravens to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that has hurt him is he hasn't had that solid number one option because Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown, as talented as he is, he's not a number one receiver in this league. I don't think so. A lot of people agree with me on that sentiment. They did go out and get Sammy Watkins, who has been productive in Buffalo and Kansas City. I loved Rashad Bateman coming out of Minnesota, was so pissed on draft night that Baltimore got him. And then, who else? They added somebody else to this wide receiver room, and I'm totally drawing a blank. Well, they re-signed Mark Andrews. Maybe they didn't add somebody else at wide receiver. I'm just, emphasizing more. Oh, Tylan Wallace. He's out of Oklahoma State. This is a late round pick. He's shown flashes. There's another solid receiver. They're adding people to the wide receiver room that I think can help and that can take the load off Lamar Jackson. And he doesn't have the burden now to not being able to throw to the wide receiver position, because that's been the one constant thing is that there hasn't been enough talent at the wide receiver position for Baltimore. Now I think there is with Watkins, with Wallace, with Bateman. And I think Marquise Hollywood Brown can now slide into a role where he can be most comfortable and most effective. So I think it could help Lamar Jackson and ease some burden now to where he can trust his wide receivers to make big plays. And not only big plays, but, the 10 to 15 yard plays, the chunk plays, instead of going just for the explosive deep plays in terms of passing.
And not only that, but they have a very solid tight end too, and Mark Andrews. So
who they just locked up. So that,
yep.
That was a key signing for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, they get back Ronnie Stanley. They did trade away Orlando Brown, but they stole Alejandro Villanueva away from Pittsburgh in free agency. They acquired Kevin Zeitler in free agency as well. So their offensive line is solid as ever. And then obviously, Anthony, we got to talk about the defense because the defense has been, the mainstay of Baltimore since, they moved there back in 96. They add Calais Campbell. They drafted Jason Owa, who is now going by Odafe. I want to say that's the right pronunciation of that name. They also added Justin Houston. I mean, they're bringing back Brandon Williams, Derek Wolfe, Malik Harrison, Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey. Like, this defense, once again, is going to be tough. And especially in the AFC North where you have the Browns, the Steelers, and the Bengals, this defense, I think, will ultimately be the reason why they get through the North. But the North got a lot tougher with, the Browns, being right there with them in terms of contention, not only in the division, but in terms of going for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, you're right. The Baltimore, the staple of the Ravens has always been a defense, and that's no different. Calais Campbell is going to make a huge impact on that defensive line for them. Yeah, I mean, this defense is so solid. It's in today's NFL, defense doesn't always win championships, but like this Baltimore defense can certainly be one that can do that for a team, kind of like how Tampa Bay's did last year in the Super Bowl. I think that this Ravens defense is very solid and has that kind of potential to do something similar.
Without question. Since we have mentioned the Browns, mentioned the Ravens, let's focus a few minutes on Pittsburgh because everybody's essentially writing them off. This could be Ben Roethlisberger's last season. They are really the media is starting to hone in on them because of the TJ Watt situation. TJ Watt's been in camp the whole time, does his individual drills, doesn't do team drills. He's pretty much in a hold in. And now it sounds like negotiations on that extension, which soon to be done, could be falling apart. And, you look at the Steelers team, Anthony, their defense is still solid. Their defense is going to be great this year. Their offense, you look at their offensive line, they did not do anything to improve it this year. They did draft a couple guys, but in the middle rounds, they spent a first-round pick on a running back, which Najee Harris is talented, but I don't think you can justify that anyway. And their wide receiver room right now just has a bunch of divas, with Juju and Claypool still butthurt over the Browns whooping their ass in the wild card game. Where do you see this Pittsburgh Steelers team going in 2021, and do you still think they are a contender?
See, this is like it's the biggest question, right? Like this is going to go one of two ways this year for Pittsburgh. I think they're either going to be at the top of the AFC North, fighting for a playoff spot and maybe even going to the AFC Championship game, or it's going to completely bottom out and be a complete disaster, and they're going to be picking top 5 in the draft next season. It's going to go one of those two ways, I think, and this team certainly has a lot of question marks, especially with that offensive line, especially with Ben Roethlisberger. Can he come back and be the Roethlisberger that he used to be? This defense lost a couple pieces, but they're still very good. They brought in a few different players. Can they settle the thing with TJ Watt? I'm curious to see if they do that or not. I can't see a scenario where they don't, but Pittsburgh is very stubborn in these kinds of things. So I can see a situation where maybe it doesn't work out with them. But to me, Jack, this is going to go one of two ways. Like I said, it's either going to be they're going to make the playoffs or they're going to be picking top 5s. I don't think there's really anything in between. And it's going to be one of the more interesting and dynamic storylines to watch all season long with this team.
Without question. I'm fascinated to see how this all transpires because, their offensive line on paper looks like one of, if not the worst in the league. And you have a 39-year-old quarterback who's not mobile anymore. And you spent a first-round pick on a running back who looked good in the preseason just behind that offensive line. But we'll see once they go up against the top teams in the conference. And lo and behold, week 1, they play Buffalo. So it's definitely going to be something to watch for sure. Anthony, we talked about the dark horses of the NFC on our last episode. Let's talk about the dark horses in the AFC. I mean, who are some of the ones that you think could, make some noise if they got into the playoffs and maybe even make a Cinderella Super Bowl run?
This AFC to me, Jack, is so deep because not only do you have Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, and Cleveland at the top, but you have Tennessee, you have Miami. The Patriots have went through a ton of changes in the offseason. The Chargers get Justin Herbert. take that next step. There's certainly talent there. They have a good defense. The Colts, that's a very big question mark, but they certainly could be in that hunt. We talked about with Pittsburgh, it's either going to be a playoff spot or top 5 pick. It's going to be one of those two. So, this AFC I think is kind of wide open because those teams outside of the top 4 are very good. Tennessee, Miami, New England, and LA. So I can certainly see, Jack, where one of these very good teams is going to get left out. Maybe a couple of them get left out of the playoffs, and any one of those, I think, can certainly make a run at the end.
I'm going to give you another team in the AFC, the Denver Broncos. They were a team all offseason talked about as the likely landing spot for Aaron Rodgers should the Packers trade him. They go into camp with a competition of Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, and I was of the opinion you got to see what you got with Drew Lock, but Teddy Bridgewater wins the competition. And you look at this team, you start off with the defense. They drafted Pat Surtain in the first round, top 10 pick, already in a secondary that includes Ronald Darby and Kyle Fuller, who I think they both were ads in free agency. You have Justin Simmons, one of the best safeties in football. Von Miller comes back after missing all of last year with an injury. They have Bradley Chubb, who also missed all of last year with an injury. And then you go to the offensive side of the ball. Their wide receiver room has so much potential with Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and KJ Hamler. And their tight ends with Noah Fant and Big O out of Missouri, who's I think a second or third year player. Their offensive line is solid. They added Quinn Myers out of Wisconsin Whitewater in the second or third round, which I thought was a underrated pick. And then Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams, he's been drafted high in fantasy football. Interesting to see how they share the load between him and Melvin Gordon. But if the defense comes back to form, especially Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, and if Teddy Bridgewater can be an average quarterback, they can sneak in as a wild card team, 9-8, 10-7 potentially. They're obviously in a tough division with the Chiefs and the Chargers, but it would not shock me if Denver sneaks into the playoffs. And this defense, if it lives up to the potential hype that they have, they could be a team that makes a run. So maybe they pull off an upset win in the playoffs, and then who knows what happens. I think once you get to the playoffs, all bets are off and anything can happen.
Yeah, that defense can get healthy. Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, those are very two dynamic pass rushers. And you mentioned all that talent in the secondary that they have. If they could put it all together, I think you're right. They can certainly make a lot of noise too. And it's like that with that second group of people that we mentioned in the AFC. So if these teams can put it together, you have young quarterbacks in some of these situations, Miami and LA. Ryan Tannehill's done a great job in Tennessee for a long time. New England, Mac Jones is your starter, a rookie for Bill Belichick.
I don't mean to cut you off. I'm so fascinated to see how this plays out because if the reports are true that Mac Jones was teaching Cam Newton stuff of the offense, it just makes me wonder, did Cam Newton just not understand what McDaniels wanted to do offensively? And B, if Mac Jones was picking up the offense quicker than Cam Newton, and we've seen the talent that he had in Alabama, obviously with all those superstar receivers, what's he going to do in New England? I mean, there's talent on that offensive side of the football. The defense is back to full strength outside of Stephon Gilmore, which we'll see if he comes back and what he can do off the quad injury. New England, you have the greatest coach of all time. You have one of the best offensive play callers in Josh McDaniels. Could the rookie quarterback, do the unthinkable and get this team back to the playoffs? And then you never count out the Patriots, regardless if Tom Brady's there or not.
Yeah, it's like the Steelers, Jack. This is going to be very fascinating to watch all year. They spent a lot of money in free agency. I can't remember the exact dollar amount, but I think it was somewhere like $250 million that they spent.
It was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous amount.
So, they certainly threw a lot of money out there to try and fix this team. They have some key pieces coming back who opted out of last year as well. So, this Patriots team, I think, I don't know if you could always call them a dark horse. I think last year just was an aberration of them missing the playoffs. They missed the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And missing the playoffs and drafting the rookie quarterback. So I certainly think that this Patriots team is certainly going to be in the fight because that's just who they are.
So as we wrap things up, much like we ranked the NFC contenders, go ahead and rank your AFC contenders. Now keep in mind, Anthony, we said whoever we rank number one is the team that we think is going to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl.
This is so hard because you have to take like your homerism hat off.
Yeah, I understand.
But fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway. Cleveland, Kansas City, Buffalo, Tennessee, Baltimore.
I love it. I'm gonna go, and I'm going with my head and not my heart on this one. Buffalo, Cleveland, Kansas City, Baltimore, Tennessee. That's my top five among the AFC contenders.
Yeah, and I could make that list like 10 teams long because I think that's how deep this AFC is.
Oh, I think we could too because we mentioned Miami, New England, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis,
the Chargers,
the
Broncos.
The Broncos. That's 11
12,
teams right there.
That's
or
12
11
total.
or 12. Yeah. I mean, like, honestly, outside of the top four, I don't think anybody's a legit Super Bowl contender. But, and they don't have the 8. What do they have? Did they expand playoffs? I don't think they did. But, I mean, there's from 5 to 12, there's 7 teams that could make the playoffs. It's just a matter of how everything shakes out, honestly. I feel like I kind of feel bad we didn't spend a lot of time on Tennessee because they obviously have a new offensive play caller. They added Julio Jones. I mean, this is a team that was in the playoffs last year. You mentioned Tannehill's had a phenomenal year, but like Tennessee could be a dark horse just because we didn't really focus a lot of time on them. So, I mean, they could be the biggest threat outside of Cleveland, Baltimore, Kansas City, and Buffalo. I mean, we both ranked them in our top 5, so we definitely agree on that.
Yeah, it's kind of like how, we didn't talk as much about San Francisco yesterday. I think that Tennessee is certainly, their defense is good. Their offense is interesting with Tannehill and Derrick Henry.
A.J. Brown and Julio Jones.
Yeah, there's certainly a team that can be reckoned with. I think that when it's all said and done, they're certainly going to they certainly are going to win their division, I think, and they're going to be at the top of the AFC with everybody else.
Oh, without question. If they don't make the playoffs, I would be stunned. I just think the talent is too much there, and while they're not on the same level, I don't think as the Big Four in the AFC, they're definitely there. And like they proved a couple years ago when they got to the AFC Championship game against, I think it was New England or Kansas City, like crazy things can happen when you get to the playoffs. And they caught fire at the right time. They go in and beat New England, and then they beat Baltimore, and it was just like, wow, like they were in the AFC Championship game, and they were leading for a little bit. And then Kansas City obviously caught fire and never looked back, but you definitely can't rule out the Titans as we head into 2021. As we wrap things up, like we mentioned at the top of the show, go back and listen to the NFC episode if you haven't, and then stay tuned Friday, our 250th episode of the podcast, which it's still crazy to me. I know it's crazy to you, Anthony, that these 4.5 years have gone by so fast, but we enjoyed recording that episode with our special guest, and we hope you all enjoy it as well. We hope you enjoyed this episode as well as the NFC preview episode. You guys can follow me on Twitter at Jack McCurry08. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony Joki, Joki. Follow The Dogland on Twitter at The Dogland, and find us on Facebook if you found our podcast through Facebook, or just type in The Dogland. And then wherever you listen to the podcast, we appreciate it. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review. Leave us any kind of review. We really appreciate it. We will be back Sunday We will be back on Friday, obviously, with our 250th episode. And we will also be back Sunday night to recap Browns Chiefs, the opener of the 2021 season. So until next time, go Browns.